Hello class. This is the first of 4 videos for the macromolecules or molecules of life. This video is going to cover carbohydrates, and so it would be sections 3.4, 3.5, and 3.7 in the textbook. Keep in mind that there are 4 big molecules that all living things are made of, carbohydrates being one of them, and that's today in this video. The other molecules are lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. Let's start with this one on carbs. So each of the macromolecules, it's another way of saying big molecule. The macromolecules are, not that there's any particular order, but carbohydrates is the first one that we're going to be discussing. So if you take a look at the word carbohydrate, you notice that the first part of it is one letter short of carbon. And hydrate, of course, means water. And so we want to be thinking about with a carbohydrate that it's a carbon chain that is hydrated. So for every carbon, there should be a water around it. All right, so they're commonly called sugars and starches. They are made of, as I was just saying, a carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen ratio of 1 to 2 to 1. What does that mean? It means that for every carbon, there should be 2 hydrogens and 1 oxygen. Or in other words, for every carbon, there is a water, a carbohydrate. They are broken down as the main source of cell energy. Think of carbohydrates like fuel. These are the molecules that we use to run our cells and do the energy that we need for cellular processes. Carbohydrates go into a process called cellular respiration, where it's converted into a molecule called ATP. Carbohydrates are the energy molecule, the fuel, basically, in the same way that we put gasoline into a car that can be used and consumed for that car to run. They are measured in the form of calories, so when you take a look at food and it says there's so many calories in that food, what they're really saying is this is the amount of carbohydrate energy that can be used to convert into cellular work. Carbohydrates are also part of some cell structures too, in particular in plants. Here's a picture of a carbohydrate monomer down here. And if you look carefully, I know it's small, but if you look carefully, you can see that this carbohydrate monomer, for every 1 carbon, there should be 2 hydrogens and 1 oxygen. All right, so H2O for every C. Okay, so here's a monosaccharide. I'm going to move over here a little bit. Here's monosaccharides are simple sugars. And notice that their suffix always ends in OSE or ose. So glucose, fructose, ribose, these are examples of monosaccharides. Monosaccharide is the name for the monomer. Think mono meaning monomer, saccharide meaning sugar. Here's a chain of glucose, and so there's 6 carbons in this chain. And if you were to count it up, then that would mean there would be 12 hydrogens and 6 oxygens. That's the chemical formula for a carbohydrate monomer. These, when we consume them, when we eat them, they taste sweet to us. Carbohydrate monomers, unlike the polymers we're going to see later, like starches and things that don't have a sweet taste, these taste sweet to us, and these are the immediate energy source that our cells will use. Okay, so move over here a little bit. These are some examples of carbohydrate structural pictures that we might see, and these are right out of your textbook. So the structural formula for this one is the one that I would show you the most, because you can see everything, right? So you're going to see the 6 carbons that are in the ring form here, and then the hydrogens and oxygens. Keep in mind that for every C there should be 4 lines, and then for every O there should be 2 lines, and every H 1 line. Sometimes you'll see the hydroxyl groups written without a line, but that's implied. And then the abbreviated structure, just notice that the carbons aren't here. But there'd be 4 lines around it, so you can assume that that's a carbon, or the simplified structure just showing the ring shape to it. All right, so the best way to identify a carbohydrate is that you look for a molecule that just has CH and O, and then the ratio should be for every 1 carbon, 2 hydrogens, and 1 oxygen. If you want to pause right here and count them up, you can. But the 6 carbons, you'll find 12 hydrogens and 6 oxygens. That's a ratio of 2 to 1. For each H or an O, or really water, right? Because water has 2 H's and an O. Here's another, and again, you can check it out and see there's going to be 6 carbons, 12 hydrogens, and 6 oxygens. You'll notice that This is an isomer. This is, the same chemical formula, but a different layout of the atoms will make for a different molecule, a different sugar. All right, so there's two types of polymers for carbohydrate. Remember, monomer is the small piece, polymer is the big piece. One of them is a disaccharide. The prefix di means two. So these are two simple sugars put together through dehydration synthesis. If we take a look at how this works, here's one monomer that's here. Here's another monomer. And the hydroxyl groups of those two monomers are going to join together. And so we're going to lose water. That's the what else. Water's coming out here. And notice that what's left behind is one oxygen that's sharing a bond between two of these monomers. And it's no longer a monosaccharide or one sugar, but instead a disaccharide or two sugar. And again, some examples of this that we can come in contact with are maltose, sucrose, and lactose. You may have heard of some of those before, in particular maybe lactose, which is milk sugar. They would each be two monomers joined together through dehydration synthesis. Okay, so here's a picture of that. Here we've got two glucoses that are joining together to form maltose. And again, dehydration synthesis occurring. Dehydrate means to lose water. Synthesize means to build. All right, so if we were to do our math here, you might think, okay, so I just double everything, right? One monosaccharide joined to another monosaccharide. And your initial thought might be, okay, so C6 plus C6 is going to give me C12. H12 plus H12 is going to give me H24. O6 plus O6 is going to give me O12. But the reality is that because of dehydration synthesis has occurred, this should really be C12, H22, O11. Why fewer? Well, because remember, water has to be lost when the two form together. And so I'm actually going to have two less hydrogens and one less oxygen than what I would expect to find in just adding up the atoms. Okay, so here's some pictures of the polysaccharide. So one of the polymers is a disaccharide with two sugars, and then there's also polysaccharides with many, many, many monomers all joined together. And some examples include glycogen, which is in and around all of your muscle cells. That's a many, many, many sugar all joined together through dehydration synthesis, and it's often branched like this, where you have one chain of monomers and then a branch off of it that goes up off the end. Starch. These would be starchy foods that we consume a lot, like potatoes and grains and pasta and bread. Those have a lot of carbohydrate in them, big polysaccharides in them. Cellulose in plants makes up the cell wall of many plants, and then chitin in many animals makes up the exterior or exoskeleton of many animals, all of which are polysaccharides, many monosaccharides all joined together through dehydration synthesis. So you can see some of these branch chains. Here's glycogen. This is animal polysaccharide. And there's a lot of carbon, a lot of chain through here, a lot of polysaccharides, and then it branches off at some point. All right, so if you were to take a look at this guy, let's do a little identifying, okay? And so if we were to think, what would I do to identify this as a carbohydrate? Well, I should expect to see just CH and O, and then I would count it up. I would find 6 carbons, 12 hydrogens, and 6 oxygens, and that 2-to-1 ratio matters because that's going to identify it as a carbohydrate. Also, do you see any functional groups? Check it out. You probably are noticing these OHs off the bottom. And those are the hydroxyl groups that you want to be thinking about, right? Practice your functional groups so that you know the parts of atoms or parts of molecules. All right, so for a summary, I want you to be thinking about a couple things. Anytime we're thinking about these molecules, think to yourself, okay, so what's their general function? What do they do? What are the monomer names? What are the polymer names? And how would I identify it? So those 4 things are important in your summary. So pause the video, see if you can go through those 4 things, or go back to the video at any point and see if you can come up with those 4 things for any of the molecules.